This is the Entrepreneurs United podcast with your hosts, John St. Pierre and Rich Hoffmann.
Rich, I got a fun topic to talk about this week, which is one that I'm actually executing right now with my companies. And I really feel as 2026 is upon us, it's time right now to really focus on 2026 and what are you and your company is going to achieve in 2026. And that concept for me, Rich, is zero-based budgeting. It's something that really turned my company around, one of my companies around last year. And it's something now I swear by, and I want to preach to everybody who's willing to listen that there's a methodology out there that exists that you should maybe learn about. And maybe as you approach 2026 budgeting, start diving into. I know you and I have talked about it a little bit, but
I think we should just preach on.
Okay.
Yeah. Preach
I was
on,
thinking
preacher.
about it.
Yeah. So what are a couple of the core principles of zero-based budgeting that you find yourself repeating yourself on with these companies that you can offer to the listeners?
Yeah. So I want to start with this. The concept of what zero-based budgeting is. For years, and I'm talking decades, I would take this year's budget and I would give everybody raises and I'd say, okay, we're going to do 10% more in revenue next year. And I'd say, if we spent this much on insurance next year, that's going to go up by 3%. And rent's going up by 3%. And I drag my budget out to next year, just extrapolating this year's numbers, adding in all the increases I expected, and boom, there's our next budget year. I'm talking decades, Rich. I did this. So that's number one. Stop doing that. What you need to do as you look at every year is evaluate every single expense as a need, urgent, not urgent, prioritize, rank, stack things. And so one of the first things that I looked at doing was evaluating where we're spending money every year. And this is a little embarrassing, I must admit. But by doing that, extrapolate from 1 year to the next year, 1 year to the next year, and just adding in the increases, I found myself years later looking at all of the expenses in our business and realizing we weren't using that software anymore, but we were paying $6,000 a year for it. We weren't using that anymore. We were paying $10,000 for it. No one actually knew what this expense was, but just hitting our credit card every single month. When you run a company for 20 years, that stuff happens. But if you have a zero-based budgeting approach, you start with zero. So the whole idea is, for lack of a better example, cancel every subscription you have, fire everybody on your team, and say, okay, let's rebuild for 2026. How much revenue expecting to come in? What's our margins going to be on that? Now let's rebuild the team. Who do we need to have? What are your A, B, C, D players? What are all of your costs? So from a pure concept, I like to start there. And I'm curious from your experience working with entrepreneurs, how many do that versus just do what I used to do and extrapolate from year to year?
The majority do what you used to do. And what's interesting is since we had Mike on, who's the author of Profit First, and since Jay Bowers had talked to me about how that revolutionized what was happening in his business in the way of profit, I've started incorporating some of these conversations with some of the companies who I'm working with. And we're starting to look at how much EBITDA, how much profit is falling out of the business, and what do you want to protect? So what is the dollar amount of profit that needs to happen at the end of the year? And then varying the expenses to be able to hit that dollar amount. And it really has changed people's thinkings. I even put together a spreadsheet that has the last 4 years. What was a planned revenue? What was the actual revenue? What was the difference? What was a planned EBITDA? What was the actual EBITDA? What was the difference? What was a planned gross margin? What was the actual? What was the difference? How much money was missed as a result of the top line getting missed, if it got missed? How much money was missed in terms of EBITDA? So we would take the miss on the top line times the gross margin to say, okay, here are the dollars that were missed. It could have dropped out. So going through all this and then going, so what's the profit that you want to have at the end of this year in 2026? And let's start there. And that's what we protect. Now let's talk about what expenses are variable. So I don't think that's exactly zero-based budgeting the way you're describing it, but there are very different profit conversations that are happening with these companies.
And it's not exactly zero-based budgeting, Rich, but it's pretty darn close because we did deploy that strategy as well, and I highly recommend it. And it's like you flip the P&L a little bit. So in a traditional profit and loss statement, you have revenue, which is 100%. Then you have gross margins, let's call it, after all of your cost of goods sold to sell whatever product it is. That's your gross margin number. Then you have your operating expenses. And then you have net income, just generally speaking. What the approach is that you're talking about, and from the book Profit First, it really plays very well in the zero-based budgeting is, yes, you want to maximize revenue, but you plan your revenue to grow a little bit. You plan that out. Yes, you want more margin, but traditionally your margins are pretty set within a couple percentage points. But then instead of having operating expenses in there, you throw your profit in. So it goes revenue, gross margin, profit. And you say, I want to make 10%. So you put in the 10%, whatever is left is how much money you have to spend on operational expenses. Now that becomes really tough. Rich, in my example, the year we did this, last year, a year ago today, we had, let's say, a gross margin, gross profit of around 17%. Our expenses were 12%. Doesn't take a genius to know what net profit we were making, 5%. 5% is not enough for a small business. You don't generate enough oxygen and cash flow to grow. You can't reinvest. You can't do anything. You're just dealing the cash flow game. You're barely even paying yourself at that level. So if you reverse it and say, okay, 17% gross profit, now 7% overhead, I now have 10%. So if you flip it around, 17% gross profit, 10% profit, I can spend 7% on overhead. Now you got some tough decisions to make, because I used to spend, right, when the example I gave you, way too much on overhead. So now you got a zero-based budget. Say, okay, start with nothing. What do we absolutely need to run this business? We need liability insurance. We can't run the business without insurance. So let's slot that in. And you work your way from highest priority, you have to have this expense to run your company, down to that's not needed anymore. And if you do that, you evaluate every single expense. But it takes going through your numbers with a fine-tooth comb to find it. But it does start with profit first.
What are some of the things that you found that are patterns that you find people end up cutting when they go through the zero-based budgeting exercise?
All the items they don't need, the things they want, the things that have
What are
been
a couple examples?
customary. So for a decade, we ran an annual company event. And that event cost money. It was run and as the company grew from 20 employees to 120, that event grew every year. Let's spend more money. Let's make it better. Let's make it stronger. That was one of the things that we unfortunately cut out of the plan. And when you think about it, that actually really hurt some of the people that have been around in the business for a long time who looked forward to that event. On the same token, others were like, yeah, I can't believe you guys kept doing that. You guys should have cut that years ago. The employees didn't feel as much benefit as you felt in it. They'd rather do their own little meeting as their team. So we cut things like that. T&E. We were spending money left and center with no controls on travel, entertainment, and meals, and all these. There was no governor on it. It was kind of like, hey, let's go spend. We spent last year plus 3%. They'd keep going. They'd spend it. Marketing spend is another one that gets cut. All the D players, all of a sudden, no longer have a fit in the business. When you put pressure on your operations team to go, hey, here's how much you can spend to produce this widget, they'll look at their team and they know who the D players are. They just didn't take action. So what this did is it forced action to start taking place. Accountability started creeping in. And I'll tell you, Rich, I'll never forget, we had cut $2 million of expenses out of our business doing the zero-based budgeting. I remember going to dinner that night and I felt like I'd lost 20 pounds. We knew we had excess in the business. We knew we weren't achieving our net profit goals. We just weren't doing anything about it until it was forced upon us to take this budgeting-based approach. And I think that's what companies need to do today. I'll say this one big important thing, Rich. I don't know about you, but in my companies and the companies that I coach, those businesses are not making enough money. They're not. A lot of people in their business are making money. There's a lot of expenses that they have that keep creeping up into their business. There's inflation. There's all these different things. But the business owners themselves in their business are not making enough money because there's not a disciplined approach. There's no better time than right now to change your mind on this, have a profit-first mentality, and do zero-based budgeting in your business.
It's funny, you made me remember last week I was talking to somebody and going through the profit-first concept, and they reminded me of something I had told them years ago. And they reminded me of telling them that we finance our bad decisions until we can't. And when we're forced to not be able to finance those bad decisions, then we're forced to have to make some of the decisions we didn't want to make, that were uncomfortable, that we've been procrastinating on. That's certainly an example in the D players, as you brought up. So we can finance the D players. We hope that they're going to get better. We're going to put coaching into them. We're worried about the pressure that's going to create on our A, B, and C players if we get rid of the D players. But then all of a sudden, if you just can't finance it anymore, yeah, it becomes easy. We know who the D players are. We need to cut them.
Yep, no doubt. I know on this podcast, Rich, we like to give, here are X amount of steps to do this, X amount of steps to do that. So if you've listened so far and you're still with me, and I've sold you on the importance of this, please believe me, it's time for you to make money in your business. Here are 5 steps. Number 1, start with your goals, not the numbers. What are you trying to achieve in 2026? And I hope that your answer is going to be profit. I want to make more profit. So forget about what happened next year. Just know you got to start with profit first. Number 2, assign ownership. Every single expense or revenue in your budget can be assigned to somebody to say, hey, it's your job to bring in the revenue. You go do your work and figure out what we get to do this year. But it's also in operations or in finance. If you can't defend this expense, this is your expense that you're in charge of. You can't defend it. Show me the ROI in it. We're cutting it. So assign ownership to each line in the budget and P&L. Number 3, require an ROI logic. Every single dollar you spend should have a financial or strategic return on investment. If somebody who owns that budget line, because you assigned it in step 2, can't tell you what the ROI is or sell the ROI to you, then maybe you should reevaluate if you should have it or not. 4, make trade-offs visible. You don't just go around and cut everything necessarily. You can potentially reallocate. We've been doing a lot, Rich, in automation and AI, as we've been workflowing and automating some steps that helps us become more efficient. Sometimes it's reinvesting the dollars in a way that can generate ROI versus wasting the dollars. So in a lot of cases, you can reallocate some resources and get trade-offs and have people see the efficiencies of that. And number 5 is review quarterly. Don't just do it once a year. Every single quarter, maybe even every single month in your business, budget versus actual. Once you have your budget set, what are you spending versus what? I just think there's no better time than now to do those 5 steps in your business. It's almost 2026. Now's the time to do zero-based budgeting and have a profit-first mentality in your business.
Hey, thanks for joining us on the Entrepreneurs United podcast, and we look forward to giving you more next week.